Welcome to our Ask an Expert show, where I invite a fellow professional in the US expat cross-border space to come in and talk to me about the issues we think Americans who are considering moving to Europe need to be aware of if they are going to thrive there. My guest today is Brian Dunhill. Brian is a founder at Dunhill Financial, a cross-border financial planning and wealth management firm based in London, and he is a financial planner dedicated to assisting Americans living abroad. Brian is an American living in London, and full disclosure, our firms do have a formal relationship. So Brian has plenty of experience, both personal and professional, to share with us on all the things Americans should be considering, thinking about, and aware of if they are considering embarking on a European adventure of their own. So without further ado, let's get into this. Hi, Brian. Welcome to Move to Europe.
Thanks so much for having me, Richard. Always great to see you.
Always great to see you too.
You know, it's fun. I feel like we're like just opposite twins. You know, you're the Brit that's in America. I'm the American that's in Britain. So
Same. I've literally just
get
had
to
that
play off.
conversation with someone. I call you my counterpart in London.
Well, we're just mirror images, right? You know,
Yeah.
you just can pull off the beard better than I can.
Well, some people don't call this a beard, but I've grown quite accustomed to it now. And also, I just want to say, I see what you're doing there. You're moving around, but actively trying not to hit the desks. We're just being told off by our producer. There's lots of like
Trying
movement,
to baby steps.
mindful movement going on here, folks. And also, if I sound off, everyone, I am full of a cold. Yes, I've got a cold at the start of summer. I can thank my kids for that. But I couldn't let Brian down, so here we are.
Where do we want to start, Richard?
Well, I think pregnant pause. Right, tell anyone who isn't familiar with you, please introduce yourself.
Well, in simple forms, if for anybody that grew up in the 80s or the 90s, I'm not just the president, but I'm also a client. And it's an old hair club for men reference for any of those that didn't grow up in America. But
Yeah, I have no idea what's going on right now.
Absolutely. Do a little YouTube clip, Richard. Little review. Hair Club for Men. That was
Little
always
research.
the slogan. I am not
Okay.
just the president. I am also a client. But essentially, I'm an American over here in London. I've lived over in Europe as well, over in Belgium. And we have clients all through Europe and all through the UK. Most of our team are made up of Americans and cross-border individuals that understand all the hardships that we have when we're dealing with cross-border issues. And we have two main companies. One, Dunhill Financial, which helps with all financial planning needs. But we know some people just need to get started. They don't need a full financial plan. They just need a place to put their money away on a regular basis as an American expat. And we also have DF Direct that can do so as a robo-advisor. So we're trying to get anybody at any income level started to build their financial plan so that financial literacy increases and more people can get their retirements and all their dreams as soon as possible.
I think we need to talk more about that, about the difference between Dunhill Financial and DF Direct, because they are very different and very important. But I actually think we should come back to that when we've given the conversation some more context, because people might be listening to this not realizing the challenges, the difficulties of being an American abroad and investing as an American abroad, and might not understand the I think critical role DF Direct is going to play going forward. So let's come back to that. But you said you got clients throughout Europe and the UK, but you got clients throughout the world, right?
Oh, absolutely. We have clients in Australia, Asia, Middle East, even down in Africa. So Americans have the same issues no matter where they go.
Yeah.
They might just be a little different from a currency basis on which countries they're in and regulatory basis. Not all countries have double taxation agreements. So there's little twists that are different. But the overarching theme is we're all stuck on citizens-based taxation. So no matter where you are, you're going to have to report your taxes back to the States. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to pay taxes back to the States. A lot of individuals just have a reporting requirement, but every single one of us has a reporting requirement back to the States.
So we're here to talk about Europe in particular because I think there's a tremendous opportunity for Americans to come to Europe and change the quality of their lives. A certain sort of American, Europe is so appealing. With cost of living is kind of like second or third on the list, but it's the culture, the way of life, the history. I think it's super appealing to a lot of Americans.
We were just talking before about our article that just hit Forbes the other day, and it was wine, food, and great double taxation agreements the reason to move to France, right? The wine's simple. It's outstanding in France. Doesn't matter if we're talking France, Italy, Spain, same thing. Food, same thing as you're saying. But for a lot of individuals, they'll actually pay less tax by living in France than they might if they lived in the United States.
The citizenship-based taxation thing, the headline is double tax. That's what gets everyone upset, and they think, I'm going to pay double tax. But in Europe, you're not. But it doesn't mean you're not. There's a myriad other difficulties and challenges that come from citizenship-based taxation that, left unaddressed, can be incredibly costly as well. Non-compliance, PFIC stuff that we're going to talk about. Like, it's real.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why the planning ahead of time before you get over to Europe is so integral. But some of that planning also comes with the problems that come about from being in the States. You're in Connecticut, highly taxed state, so you're paying federal tax plus state tax. But say somebody moves to France and takes a step out into a state like Florida, Texas, any of the zero tax states. Now, all of a sudden, they're paying less tax when they're resident in France than they would be if they were still resident in Connecticut.
Wait, why? How?
Well, essentially, France has one of the best double taxation agreements of any other country in the world with America. And the double taxation agreement states that if somebody lives in France, but all of their income comes from the States, they're only going to pay U.S. taxes. So if they can avoid state income tax, you're only paying U.S. federal income tax. Let's say your typical retiree is getting maybe U.S. investments, U.S. IRAs, Social Security, maybe a pension from an old company. Those will only be taxed in America. You'll report in France, but you won't owe anything in France.
There's no excess catch-up.
The majority of our retired clients in France are paying less tax than they did when they were in California, New York, Connecticut, any of these states. And on top of that, the cost of living is lower. The food is better. The wine is better. And you know what? If you want a good pizza, if you're in the south of France, you know what you do? You drive to Italy.
What a way of life.
It's a pretty good life.
What a way of life. Yeah, so the reason I'm doing this sub-series, Move to Europe, is because my business and my podcast primarily has been focused on expats living in America. And I think there's a tremendous opportunity for expats to come to America. America, love it or hate it, whatever you think's wrong with it, it is a land of opportunity. It really is. And people could come to America and change their lives financially by moving here. But what I've realized living here for over a decade now and seeing people make this move and other moves back, is there is a tremendous opportunity for people to leave America and specifically go to Europe and change the quality of their lives, as I mentioned before. So are you seeing that? Are you seeing a heightened interest in Europe? Well, leaving America in particular, but Europe especially?
Absolutely. The flow of individuals is going all about. It's not an immigration question. It's just people moving cross-border, and it's across all ages. The opportunities for Europeans to come to America is astronomical because there's so many opportunities that way. The opportunities for Americans to come over to Europe, to the UK, is astronomical, and they're coming over this way. The number of American expats is growing every single year. And I made a mistake at the beginning of the year in one of our other articles in Forbes stating every 4 years we get an excess of the number of people that are relinquishing their citizenship, and they blame it on whoever became president. We had 5,000 people rescind in the first year of Biden. We had 5,000 in the first year of Trump #1. Every other year we have about 1,000. And I basically surmised that the number of American expats was growing more because of demographics, i.e. the baby boom generation is all retiring. With them retiring, I would expect them to essentially not have children at home and not have to go into an office. Therefore, it's easier for them to move abroad. And so we've been watching that trend go up and I expect it to continue to go up until 2030, when essentially the majority of the baby boomers will have gotten to retirement and they'll be getting into older age. So things will normalize at that time point. But the thing that I can tell you is the number of students that are studying internationally and the number of the working class that are actually trying to move abroad has increased every single year since I've been doing this since 2011. So I can't blame them. For
Well,
you as a Brit in America, it's a great opportunity. For Americans over here, it's a great opportunity.
here's a question for you. You're an American living in Europe. What's it like?
It's amazing. You want to go down to Spain, it's a 2-hour flight. I go down to Spain for a weekend. I go to Portugal for the weekend. Tomorrow, I'll literally go to the south of France as we're opening up our office in Nice. I'll go down there on Friday morning. I'll come back on Saturday night, and it's not a hardship. So the culture, the opportunities, the atmosphere is just wonderful, and the price point just adds to it.
I tell you, as a Brit living in America, I truly understand the value of that. As a Brit living in Britain, I took it for granted. I thought everywhere had the wealth of culture and experiences on our doorstep that we had, and it took moving for me to realize America's a wonderful place. But you know, going from Manchester, where I lived, to Paris or Madrid or Rome, where I got engaged, is not quite the same as going from Greenwich, where I now live, to Cincinnati or Des Moines. No disrespect to Des Moines, or not that I've been to Cincinnati or Des Moines, but I can imagine what I'm going to find there, because it's one country, and America is vast and it's amazing, but it's not quite the same, and it's expensive.
It's gotten very expensive. It is shifted in big ways, and that's where I just expect, especially with the movements in the dollar of the last couple of months, this opportunity to jump in and come back to Europe, cement a good value in your dollars, be able to deal in a currency that's not been inflated as much as the U.S. dollar, is a great way to deal with some of the hardships of retirement planning, i.e., getting a fourth pillar on there instead of just 3 pillars.
Hey, listen, right. So I was gonna ask you about how, look. So one's in America thinking about Europe. How do they get here? But before I do, and also where should they be looking at? Before I do, I've seen you writing about this currency thing, and I know the devaluation of the dollar is in the news. But just expand on that. What you're referring to there.
Essentially, we won't get too political because this isn't a political podcast, and nobody cares about each other's political views on something. But whether you like or dislike Donald Trump, we know one of his biggest aims is to emulate Ronald Reagan or Richard Nixon, right? And that is devaluing the U.S. dollar. Richard Nixon devalued the U.S. dollar by going off the gold standard. Ronald Reagan formed the G5, and essentially that devalued the dollar. So essentially, since we went off the gold standard till today, we've always had 10 to 15 years of dollar growth to 10 to 15 years of dollar weakness. That's the simplicity of the chronological order, and we're just coming out of 15 years of dollar growth. So now, essentially, the easiest way to expand an economy is by devaluing your currency, because all of your exports can go out at better prices. That's the simplicity of what the Trump administration is trying to put together. Now, in the near term, everybody knows that. They know the initiative is being dubbed the Mar-a-Lago Accords. Whether that's an official application and it's in process, whether the tariffs are part of that, well, we'll have to find out later on. But this is definitely going on, and people are flocking towards shifting dollars out, which has brought down the dollar significantly. So if we go based on historic trends, we would expect a 10 to 15 year cycle in this path. It doesn't have to be guaranteed, but where we want to look at things is when we're building a portfolio, I want my safe money to be in the currency that I'm going to be buying my baguettes or my bread. So if I'm Richard Taylor and I'm buying my kids bread in US dollars, I want to have my safe money in US dollars. I can speculate a little bit on foreign bonds. But if I'm over here in the UK and I'm having to use my emergency fund in British pounds, I should be buying those short-term and mid-term bonds in British pounds to make sure I'm secured in British pounds. This is one of the number one things that we're seeing in people's portfolios that are moving abroad, that they need to start planning for that long-term currency changeover. It's been wonderful to have huge allocations to US dollars for the last 10, 15 years, but that shift could be really happening at this point in time.
Correct me if I'm wrong here, but my assumption is I bet most Americans outside of America keep their assets in the US in dollars.
Absolutely, because it's easier, it's a bigger marketplace, it's
Yeah.
a bigger debt marketplace, and it has been king for 15 years. Um,
Yeah.
it shouldn't be this disjointed at this point in time because Powell, the head of the Federal Reserve, has been forced to keep rates a little bit higher because of the fear of inflation coming about from the tariffs. Everybody else, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Europe, the UK, have all started decreasing interest
Yeah.
rates. That differential is really the equation that people should be putting money in dollars, but that's where this fear trade has gone over to other currencies. We got an inflation reading that was lower than expected this last week at 2.3%. With that being lower, hopefully that means that Powell can lower rates and normalize them across the board of all the central banks. If that happens, that could be the precursor to the next wave of dollar weakness. That is when an administration really wants to push down their currency, it's easier to push it down than it is to push it up.
And all your assets are in dollars, and that dollar weakens, that's going to hurt. That could undo your investment gains.
Absolutely. When we think of what the dollar's done this year so far, it's gone down 7%. So
Yeah.
if you have, say, a 1-year CD that's paying you 4%, but you've lost 7% on the currency, you're down 3% on your safe money.
Yeah.
The important
Wow.
words there is safe money. So,
Yeah.
it's not to say that we want to have all of our fixed income exposure in euros or such, but our safe money, that rainy day fund, that 6 months worth of savings that we all have to tell people to have as financial planners, should naturally be in the currency that we're spending it in, because otherwise we're speculating.
All my cross-border conversations, they tend to focus on tax because of all the obvious landmines there. And then there's a lot about investments, PFIX and stuff, which we may or may not talk about today. We talk about PFIX a lot, but this one is also huge. This is like the silent killer. No one talks about this anywhere nearly as much. And currency, we talk about not predicting investment markets, but currency is impossible. It is high-level themes like this are different, but like day to day, trying to predict currency is a fool's, more so than usual, it's a complete fool's errand. But this can have really serious implications.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, 2 weeks ago, we were looking at huge movements in 30-year yen bonds. Now, we've had 30 years, our entire careers, Richard. We've been able to say, okay, well,
I'm a bit
we
younger
don't
than you, I
really.
think. Maybe not quite. I've not been quite out of this for 30 years yet.
Yeah, but we were looking at it in high school and such. So, um, essentially, Japan's been a one-way trade for a good long time, and all of a sudden, even Japan were looking at raises in interest rates. So that comes back to the number one rule in financial planning. We need some diversification. Our safe money should be in our local currency, but when it comes to the rest of our currencies, the rest of our fixed income, we need some diversification because it's unpredictable in those types of ways.
Brian, until, I don't know, mid-Feb, maybe early February, diversification was becoming a dirty word. It was all about, I want US large cap, US dollars. That's all anyone wanted. If the difference in our conversations from mid-January to mid-February was incredible. The way we as people whipsaw back, it is wild.
But even when we were having those conversations where people were saying we want to be overweighted to the US, we were expressing our fears that essentially the majority of the market was being made up by 7 stocks, or now 10 stocks, as they call them, the Batmans, instead of the Magnificent Seven. And I think that's an important conversation to have right there, because it's not that the American markets have really outperformed in the last 10 years. It's one sector has dominated world growth, and that sector happens to be predominantly in the United States. When we look at the Mag 7, 2 of their CEOs are Indian. 2 of them, their biggest market is in India. Are those Indian companies or are those US companies? They happen to be
They're
headquartered in the
US.
US, right? 60% of the Mag 7's revenue comes from outside of the United States. Are these US companies, or are they just headquartered in the United States? We easily can make those arguments about Swiss companies. Is Nestle really a Swiss company? Are we really getting exposure to the Swiss franc? Or are they just global companies? Unilever in the Netherlands, HSBC here in the UK. Where their revenue comes from becomes, to me, more interesting than where they're headquartered. And that's where the bond side is really significantly important, because it affects your exact financial plan in the near term. The stock side of the portfolio is fascinating from the vantage point of which sectors do we want to be in instead of just the S&P 500. Do we want to have more exposure to tech or other aspects? This last year, we've been heavier in healthcare stocks, because essentially it was the first year that a sector was supposed to have higher earnings than the tech sector, but was at a lower valuation. Risk to return. Which do you want to be in? Cheaper. It's how do we build a portfolio so that we go back to that keyword that we're diversified. The highest mark of the S&P was 42% of it was made up by 7 stocks. That's not diversification. So everything that we were doing was trying to reduce that exposure while getting that upside. So buying companies that are associated with the trend. So let's consider AI, right? Now, if we buy energy companies that are involved with the grid network, right? More AI supercomputers means more use of electricity. One uses the other, but that means we don't have to buy as much NVIDIA, but we get the same exposure that NVIDIA has. Cybersecurity. There's cyber attacks constantly. The pricing exposure goes up with the entire tech sector. We can buy cybersecurity, get that same correlated growth without having to have that overexposure into the Mag 7. So diversification is my biggest fear, because those companies have done so well. But what do they say on the disclaimers of every single page of our documents? Past performance is not indicative of future returns. Or it's just like the rearview mirror. Items in the rearview mirror may appear larger than they are in real life.
Recency
I actually
bias
do that
is
one
real.
backwards for just the joke part of it. So please don't send in any hate mail saying it actually says something different on your mirror.
Brian, just pulling this back to like specifics of being an American looking out to Europe. If someone was thinking about moving to Europe, like where would they start? How is there, if you set your mind on France or Spain or wherever, is there always a way in?
Well, those immigration questions, there's typically great ways to be able to get into each of these different countries. France is extremely welcoming, and we've got a great immigration lawyer that anybody that needs an introduction, we can send you right down their way. But the things that you want to think about before you get over to a country like that is, first of all, look at their double taxation agreement to correspond it with your personal plan. I'm talking about it being great for a retiree. For somebody like Richard with a business, there might be some contrasts that are going to be a little bit different. For somebody that's on an employment contract, it is a socialistic state. It might be a little bit more expensive in certain ways. So you want to look at your personal situation.
So would you say, Brian, in an ideal situation, in a perfect world, rather than having your heart set on a country and then trying to make your situation work, would it be better if like you're open? Europe is many different countries, many different regimes. Depending on your situation, you could try and pick the right one to suit your circumstances.
This is a philosophical type of question, Richard, so I'm going to give you a philosophical type of answer. Financial security, to me, is knowing exactly where you want to go and trying to figure out how to make it work financially instead of moving to someplace just because the financials are better.
You mean not letting the tail wag the dog, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm
I agree
not
with you, by the
moving.
way. Yeah.
I'm not going to move to Monaco just because I can get in a lower tax bracket and there's no estate tax.
Does
But
Monaco work for an American, though?
well, the princess seems to have moved there, so she's figured something out. But
But an American in Monaco is still getting taxed in the US, right? And
yes, but there's some maneuvers and some different
Oh.
tweaks, which I don't think that's the point that you're trying to get to on this podcast. That all being said, I typically really start with that double taxation agreement. How is it going to affect my current situation? The second thing is going to be, are the list of professionals that I'm working with now competent to work in those jurisdictions? A lot of financial advisors back in the States are wonderful at being able to get somebody right to the point of retirement and being ready for going over to Europe, but they might not have the competency of what to do once they get over to Europe. In other words, they might not have access to European bonds. They might not have knowledge of the double taxation treaty. They might not be able to speak that local language to be able to understand what those local rules are. All the way down to the nuances of how the local Social Security system might work.
Brian, let me just bring
like.
this to life for people. We are a cross-border firm.
Mhm.
Plan First Wealth is a cross-border firm. All our clients are dual citizens, green card holders. So we know cross-border. And yet, when we have clients, Brits who we specialize in right now, return to the UK or elsewhere, we've got, what do we have, a client in Portugal? We will pass them over to Brian and Dunhill Financial because we know way more about cross-border stuff, specifically for Brits, than 99.9% of firms over here. But even I think actually not even we recognize. I think it's because of that we recognize that there's so much stuff we don't know when a client lands in the UK or elsewhere in Europe, and that's when we feel it's in the best interest of bringing in a firm like you who understands all these nuances, who can do what you said about matching bond investments into euros and getting that balance right. So even we recognize that, and it's frustrating to me how few other people truly recognize that. How despite ourselves and a few others making a lot of noise about this, and the GFPI, which you and I are members of, making a lot of noise, the awareness amongst other professionals is still quite low, and people just think, "Oh, I can carry on managing this," not realizing that they're doing their client a disservice. They're leaving all, like we call them landmines. They're leaving all these landmines that could have been, avoided altogether. If they're underserving.
Here's the funny thing is, I've had many. I think it's the clients just as much as the financial advisors. The number of clients that have said to me, "I've had this financial advisor for 20 years. They've been amazing to me," and I'll look at their statements. They'll be from Edward Jones or one of your good solid firms, and you look at the statement and you're thinking to yourself, "Yeah, they did a great job for you for 20, 30 years to get you to that place. Can they help you in France?" And they say, I really don't want to get rid of my financial advisor. They've been there with me for 20, 30 years. And we say, okay, let's have a three-way call. We'll walk them through exactly how we do things, et cetera, et cetera. Most of the time, those financial advisors say to those clients, hey, we'll grab a beer when you're here in town in the States, but you really need somebody that can actually help on these cross-border things. We have no idea how to do these types of things. So a lot of times it's that great relationship, and you have clients that way that
No,
they don't they'll move back here to the UK and they don't want to leave you.
they don't want to leave us, and I'm grateful for that, and it's gratifying to hear that. Actually, do you know what, we experience that less. I think because our clients are expats who come here, and very often they'll be at another firm for 10, 20 years, and we'll have one conversation with them. And we'll be
Absolutely.
like, there'll be an informational reporting mess. There'll be PFIX everywhere. We picked this up in half an hour. But it's kind of, it's one thing if your client moves to France and thinking, I don't have the wherewithal to advise this client in France. It's another thing thinking, oh, this Brit's come over from the UK, now they're in America, I can help them. and not realizing that it's a different side of the same coin.
We're finding more and more of those occasions where it's the client that gets in the way than
Yeah.
the other advisor trying to pitch them. They're trying to say, find somebody like, here in the UK, find somebody like Richard, or in America, find somebody like Brian. And I tend to think that that will continue as more and more of this information comes out, as more and more currency differentials start to impact situations, which is exactly why we're talking about it now. Our topic for our quarterly investment newsletter is currencies, 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 stealing the real estate mantra of location, location, location. That's what's going to move the markets in the next couple of months, in the next couple of years. And it's going to impact expats that much more. But when it comes to the investment universe, that's easy. The financial planning universe, it's the pre-planning that's so important. You were just talking about people get over to the US, then they end up with PFIX. If they were to talk to you before they got to the US, you would have been able to say, these are the things that you need to get rid of before you get on that airplane. And it's the same way. If somebody's going to come over to France, well, they're not going to end up with a PFIC issue, but they're going to end up potentially with issues when it comes to gift taxes and estate taxes. This is the case in lots of countries in Europe, but not all of them. A handful of European countries have gotten rid of their estate taxes. Portugal, Austria, etc. Italy only has a 4% estate tax. I don't know about you, but if they take 4% of my estate, I'm not going to mind. It's not worth planning too much over 4%.
Keep it.
Exactly. You guys do a lot for us. Go ahead, have it. But when it comes to some states, some countries like France and Belgium, it can get in excess of 60%.
Wow.
And when they're taking more than half, that's when you want to really think about planning. So in the States, when you're, for yourself, Richard, you want to reduce your estate, you can gift down to your kids. Basically, you can just reduce your estate tax exemption whenever you're gifting over that $18,000 threshold, right? France, it's a little different. You can only gift your kids 150,000 euros every 10 years.
Whoa. Okay.
So if you have a client that's going to move to France and they're retired, they have more money than what they need to plan financially, guess what we're going to really concentrate on before they get on that plane to France? Do you want to gift any money to kids, family, friends, charity, anything else before we get to France
as well, right? Because someone might say, "Oh, I'll do it into a trust." Well, yeah. Well, then you got to be really careful with trusts. And
absolutely.
Outside of America.
Jonathan says that the French don't trust a trust, which is a nice little tagline. He's always got the little taglines in there. Trusts can end up being taxed as regular income. So when I was saying you could end up in a lower tax bracket in France than you were if you were in Connecticut, you could end up being in a higher tax bracket by doing that in a trust. A trust is a beautiful instrument for somebody in the States. A Brit moves to America. Hey, you want a trust. You want to avoid that probate. You move to France, and all of a sudden, first of all, you don't need the trust. It's not helping you in any way, shape, or form. But second of all, if the French fisc finds it, they're going to expect that to be paid out and determined as potentially earned income. Yeah. And that's extremely costly.
Super careful with trusts. And I find Brits get into a false sense of security. They think, oh, we got a trust in the UK. A trust is a trust. It's a trust, but it's not a trust. Let's talk about PFIX quickly, because then we can talk about DF Direct as well. So we've alluded to it a few times here. You and I have an entire podcast episode on PFIX, so people can go back and check that out. But essentially, we're talking about non-US collective investments. So mutual funds, ETFs, what we call unit trusts in the UK, OICs. You've moved to Europe. You want to save in Europe in euros or pounds, and you naturally think you'll buy ETFs. That is a problem. Why is that a problem, Brian?
Absolutely. It's so anytime, and this goes back to If we go back way back in the day, Lincoln brought about rules on citizens-based taxation. So all of our problems come about from Lincoln. Then essentially Nixon brought about these
Wait, you just
problems
need to
with
go back a second
PFICs.
there. Was that because they were scared of people fleeing the Union and not contributing to the war effort?
Exactly. So they'd either flee to Canada or back to the UK, and basically the government said, yeah, you can go over there, but then you have to pay for the war. So either fight in it or pay for it. Lincoln brought in citizens-based taxation. Nixon brought in the PFIC rules because people were sending all their money to the Cayman Islands, putting it under a company, a shell company, and then saying, my money's safe over there. It has nothing to do with America. And then
I didn't
Reagan
know
brought
that.
in the FBARs. So we have
Okay.
three prominent Republicans that put in these nice big rules that essentially keep our hands tied as Americans that are going abroad. Now, essentially, the FBAR, it's just annoying because it's $10,000. Now, the PFIC becomes really restricting because that rule that I think both of us would agree an American should not be putting all their money into a shell company in the Cayman Islands and saying, I don't make any money in America, because then the rest of us have to pay a little bit more. It actually got wrapped into other collective investments, all the ones you listed. In France, the most popular one is a pension épargne, so a pension wrapper. And essentially the UCITS or the ETFs, exchange traded funds, all get wrapped into that. The problem with these is the US, they're probably not going to notice it until you go sell it. And then it becomes a rock and a hard place of how you get taxed on it. So you will get taxed well over 50%, sometimes 60, 70, 80%. And that's not even the most important, the most annoying part. It's going to be the time that you spend with your accountant, and it's not going to be fun time with your accountant. You and I, we know plenty of great accountants that we'll spend time with, but they're going to be bashing their head against the wall saying, why do you have this? It's only going to hurt you from a tax vantage point and a reporting vantage point.
Don't the IRS predict it takes something stupid like 20 to 30 hours per form, and it's one form per PFIC. So S&P 500 tracker, that's one form. FTSE All World ex-US, that's another form. And people might have 10 more PFICs in a portfolio.
I think it's 20 to 30 shots of whiskey on top of that 20 to 30 hours. It's painful. It's not easy.
And
It's not.
expensive. Before you even get
It's
into tax, just the cost to pay your accountant to do this every single year is going to be a lot. Plus the tax is going to be punitive. Just don't have.
absolutely.
They're a nightmare.
I never thought that I'd be spending part of my career pitching. Do you know how great it is to receive a 1099? Because then you can file your taxes in an easy way. Not receiving that on a foreign investment just means that you're having to manually put that all together with your tax professional, and it's going to be incomplete. They're going to have to make a lot of guesstimates. So guess what? You're red flagged for every single audit because you have an imperfect form.
Yeah.
So we always suggest to stay away from PFICs, and we found one exception. In my 15-year career, I found one exception that I will make to that, which is if you're living in a country like France, you can buy a cash-filled pension d'épargne, or assurance vie, sorry. So life insurance policy that's like a variable annuity for up to 150,000 euros if you have less than 6 months to live. That's the only
Okay.
time I found an
That's
exception.
pretty
And
specific.
the reason why it's specific is because the death benefits are actually worth more than the additional reporting that you'll have. But notice, we're telling you not to invest it. We're telling you to keep it in cash so that it's as clear as day on how to do the accounting, just in case you live more than that 6 months. And we're not wanting to do it long term. So it's not every single person should be buying an assurance vie, which typically is what any non-American should be doing in France. But that's the only exception I've ever seen globally that I would say somebody should or could buy a PFIC.
Okay. So the challenge here is there's hundreds of thousands, I don't know, millions. How many Americans are in Europe who are living here in these currencies and want to invest here? We don't want it, to our point earlier, don't want it in dollars in the US for a variety of reasons. One of which might be if the currency weakens. Um, what are their options? What are their solutions? What can they do without breaching
Well,
these PFIC rules?
so the first thing is they should be mindful of which platforms they're investing on. Most of the platforms, there's a lot of great broker dealers in the United States that are just dollar centric. You know, I,
Mhm.
I I mentioned Edward Jones earlier. I love it when I see an Edward Jones statement because it's always going to be extremely conservative, extremely boring, right? No high flying investments on there, but that also means no foreign currencies. They're not going to have access to foreign bonds. So you can go direct platforms that you're going to have access to these foreign securities, or you can be buying collective investments in the states that give access to those foreign currencies. Not every broker dealer is going to have access to that. And even the ones that do have access to it, some have better pricing than others. So that's where I'm not going to start naming names because I don't want to get hate mail from some of those companies. But some companies, if you buy a GBP bond, a UK GUP bond, or a European bond, you're going to get a much worse price than you would on other platforms. And that's important to note
Ah.
in doing so. So it's being able to get the access points. It's being able to exchange currencies sometimes in the portfolios. If you're needing a monthly income stream, I have my money in the US, but I live in France. How do I get it from the US to France at the best rate? Going directly through your bank account doesn't matter if it's an American bank or a French bank. They're probably going to charge 3.5%. Some of the broker dealers will actually convert for you at a very, very low cost. Otherwise, it's building a mechanism between those two that's going to do it at a much better price than the banks. But you need to have an action plan of how you're going to get your dollars into euros or how you're going to get your dollars into pounds and get it at a good rate.
Yeah, so it's not just the investment piece, is it? There is so much more to this. Tax, currency, investments. That's it, right? Tax, currency, investments. Before you get into all the like personal stuff about logistics, do you have a pet?
Getting a pet over here,
Or getting a
it's
pet, moving a pet over here? Oh, is that what you
oh,
meant? Right? Yeah, yeah. You mean yeah? I meant flying your. Good. So maybe have dogs. How'd you get your dog over here? Hey, I've
it's
got a pit bull mix. Can't even get my pit bull mix over here.
absolutely it's costly, it's paperwork intensive, and you face having them in quarantine for several
Yeah.
weeks in certain countries.
So, going back to PFIX, right? So you avoid them at all costs. If you're with a regular firm, they just aren't going to have the capabilities to do this in a way that is appropriate for you and your needs. A firm like Dunhill, you're built for this. You have access to the platforms. This is what you do. Where does DF Direct come in?
So DF Direct is essentially our robo advisor. So from the vantage point in the UK, it's the equivalent of Nutmeg. In the US, it's the equivalent of Betterment, but it's designed for Americans that are cross border. Uh, this is a great way that somebody can use any amount. It's no minimum, so you could send in $50 a month, and you can get into our mixed portfolio that meets your risk profile and you can get it growing. So it's really designed for those emerging affluent. They're just starting out in their first job. They need to put away a couple $100 a month. Most financial advisors, it would cost too much for them for the client to get value out of them. We're building and designing a portfolio that works for them here in the UK, in Europe, that they can access at any price point.
I just want to. This is massive, right, people? Because Dunhill Financial, wealth management firm, Plan First wealth management firm. We work with people who have got hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to invest, and that is obviously not everyone, but everyone starts somewhere, and oftentimes that somewhere starts with regular and small savings. And that's easy for me to do here in the US. I use Betterment, I use Acorns, I use lots of other stuff as well. It's easy. You mentioned Nutmeg in the UK. If you're an American in Europe or elsewhere, Betterment's not an option because you don't have a US address or you're not a US person. And then you have the dollar problem. And no domestic solution is going to work for you because of the PFIC problem. And that's it. Until DF Direct, that was it. Unless you had several $100,000 to approach you guys and work a one-on-one client relationship. And there was nothing in that space in between. And I think a lot of people either didn't invest or fell victim to the PFIC problem. And now they have DF Direct. I think it's massive.
Absolutely. And it's the children that are growing up into this system that if they're sitting on huge cash balances because they could never get going, we're only going to bring down the number of people that have financial plans instead of bringing it up. I'm devastated that only 7% of Americans actually have a proper financial plan.
7%?
Yeah, it's 7%.
That's what, in the US?
That's in the US. I don't think the UK is even that high. So it's anything we can do to get that from 7% to 8%. And it doesn't matter how many phone calls I take or you take, Richard. We have to do much more to be able to get that to the next level.
Honestly, I mean, it wasn't necessarily about expanding the reach of financial planning that I started the podcast, but it was more in this cross-border space. Look, financial planning is many, many things, but one of the secret sauce for me is taking advantage of all available opportunities, financial opportunities, whilst avoiding all landmines for year after year, for decades. And I find that when people come to the US, there are more opportunities, but also anything non-US related, anything expat related in the US, there are more landmines, and boy, are they expensive. And I found, to your point about one-on-one, about conversations and how many times I answer the phone, I was having the same conversations repeatedly, and I thought, we need to get this message out there. So I did a blog, and then it's morphed into a podcast. It's just about trying to put it out there to reach more people so that they can identify and diffuse or even avoid landmines altogether, and then hopefully take advantage of opportunities and build more financial plans.
Let's be honest, Richard. The more we talk about PFICs, hopefully in the next couple of years, we'll get less phone calls with people with PFICs. So it helps us over the long haul because we get to have more enjoyable conversations with our clients.
Here's something interesting for you as we wrap up here. Something I found, though, since I started the podcast, I will have people reach out to me who listen to the podcast, who I know have heard me talk about PFICs, who have PFICs, but they haven't realized that when I'm sat here talking to you or James, and I'm referring to, even when I'm super specific about what I'm referring to, they haven't quite put two and two together and realized, oh yeah, that's what that is.
It's an ostrich in the sand. Okay, I've heard of this, I understand this, but I don't necessarily want to deal with it just yet. And it only gets worse at that point in time because it accumulates.
Yeah,
I mean, the last time we were talking, the markets happened to be down just a little bit. And I remember we were saying, this is a great opportunity for people to get out of their PFICs because the tax hit is not going to be as severe when the markets are down. But as the markets grow over the course of time, the problem grows.
Yeah.
The more you put it off, the worse it gets.
Totally. That PFIX is one thing you really just need to just grab it by the neck and just deal with it and just move on with your life. We've had this situation where I've been the one to break it to a client. We talked about the 5 stages of grief last time. You brought that up, and they've gone through it and they've got the other side. And now it was years ago, and it's done. It's over. It's when people kind of sit on it and let it fester. It eats away at them. Just deal with it. Move on.
Absolutely. Otherwise, find a friend that's not American and give away all the money.
So listen, I got you on to talk about moving to Europe, and we ended up PFIX. This is it's going to be on a gravestone here from you and me, Brian. Right. So, Brian, where can people find you?
Okay, DunhillFinancial.com is our website. Info at Dunhill Financial is the best way to reach our entire team. Our robo-advisor is www.df-direct.com. Any questions, info at Dunhill Financial. We've got a whole team that will be able to help you put that together. Check out our YouTube channel. We're going to have Richard coming and joining us on there because we want to reciprocate and have some fun.
Excellent. I look forward to it. All right, Brian, thank you for coming on the podcast again.
Thank you so much for having me, Richard.
All
Always
right,
great
mate.
to
I'll
see
see
you.
you soon. You too. Bye bye.